Welcome back to Food for Change, a podcast from the Global FoodBanking Network where we bring together big ideas, bold innovations, and inspiring action to serve up solutions for people and planet. This podcast is made possible thanks to the generous support of Kellanova. Kellanova strives to provide a delicious choice of brands that people know, trust, and enjoy, and is committed to advancing sustainable and equitable access to food and creating better days for people and planet. And also by HEB. HEB grocers and markets strive to be a workspace and shopping environment that is rooted in an unwavering belief that each and every person counts. Since the inception of its hunger relief program, HEB has donated over 1 billion pounds of food to help nourish neighbors and communities throughout Texas and Mexico. This week, we're digging into the ways that policy and advocacy play a role in reducing food waste, strengthening food security, and shaping more resilient food systems. We're joined by Emily Broadleib, the founder and director of Harvard's Food Law and Policy Clinic and expert on all things food donation policy, by Brianna Casey, longtime CEO of Food Bank Australia. And finally, Tanaporn Oy-Isarankun, Director of Operations and Communications at Scholars of Sustenance Thailand. Let's dig in.
I'm Jason Woods from the Global FoodBanking Network, and you're listening to Food for Change, serving solutions for people and planet. Today, we're really happy to have Emily Broadleib with us. Emily is the founding director of the Harvard Law School Food Law and Policy Clinic, the nation's first law school clinic devoted to providing legal and policy solutions to health, economic, and environmental challenges facing our food system. Emily, it's really nice to see you.
Thank you. It's lovely to join you today. Thanks for having me.
So if you'll permit me, I'd like to start off with kind of a basic question. What is a clinic in this context? Because I think most of the time I would think of the medical profession, like going to a doctor's office when you hear the word clinic. What does it mean to have a food law and policy clinic?
I love the question because I feel like it's a good chance for me to give my public service announcement about what law school clinics are. So interestingly, it's if you take that mindset of you're going to the clinic, like your healthcare provider, in a way it's like that. Our clinics, like mine and others in Harvard Law School and other law schools, are answering people's legal and policy questions. And the idea is really that they're an opportunity for law students to be getting hands-on learning while they're in law school, while doing good for the world. So there's a lot of clinics that kind of do direct legal services work for individuals who can't afford that. And then our clinic is doing work also for clients and partners, very much more in not in the kind of direct services place, but in the policy. What does this mean? What are you allowed to do if you're trying to innovate in the food space? How might the laws get in your way? And how could you change them to make the food system healthier, better for the environment, better for people?
Wonderful. Thank you. And what exactly is food law and policy? Am I correct in that it's kind of a merger of two different fields?
Yeah. So it is. It's very much a field that I think is more functional, based on and sort of, to your point, the two fields that existed and still exist are agricultural law, which was a long-standing area of law that really looks at the laws regulating farming and the owning of farms and the farming practice, which intersects with food, but there's a lot of things we produce on farms that actually aren't food. And then there's something called food and drug law, which is the work of the Food and Drug Administration, which also touches on food, but that agency, 80% of what they do is drugs and medical devices. So food law and policy was really saying we need to take elements of both of those fields and also look at growing policies at state and local levels in the US and in other countries to really get a sense of what are the ways that law is really intersecting with the food that we grow, the way that it gets to people, the way we communicate, and then relevant to our work with Global FoodBanking Network to what happens to that food if it can't be used for its initial purpose. So that's really the idea of food law and policy, is there's pulling all these different areas of law to figure out how they impact what's going on with food and how we can make it better.
So you start FLPC, and then a handful of years later, the Global Food Donation Policy Atlas was formed, which is a partnership between Harvard FLPC and the Global Food Banking Network, which is how we know each other. What is the Atlas, and why is that a necessary tool?
We've been doing a lot of work in the US on policies around food waste. So, what we found in that work is actually that even though more and more people are realizing that food waste is like, it's really bad for the environment, it's really bad for people, it takes food away that would otherwise be available, it's a poor use of natural resources, and it's bad for the economy. It wastes money because we're spending money to produce, process, transport, and ultimately then transport to the landfill that food. So we've been doing a lot of work in the US on both supporting individual policies, but over time, really tracking state policies between different states to say, who's doing well, who can do better, what's happening. And so when we first connected with GFN, it was really around this idea of the same thing could actually be useful globally, which is to say, um, there's not a great place for countries who are thinking about improving their policies or changing them to see like what the options are for what they could do, to see what their neighbors are doing, to see what other countries that they feel like are comparable to them are doing in this space. And so the idea behind the atlas was to really figure out what are the core policies that come up repeatedly when you speak to food banks, businesses, and government about taking steps to reduce food waste and increase donation of safe, edible food. And then how can we track those across countries and share best practices and help countries like really see where they're falling down and could do better to make progress in this area.
So what are some of those core policies
Yeah.
that you can use to prevent food loss and waste?
So the policies that we now track comprehensively are date labeling. So, are there standards for date labels on food? And is it clear whether food can be donated past a date? In most cases, the majority of foods, the date is about quality and freshness and not about safety. And does the country really make that distinction and allow donation after that? Both tax incentives. So, transporting the food is not free, like giving businesses an incentive to donate is really important. And then another issue that really was new to us because this isn't part of US law was around tax barriers. So in every other country we've looked at besides the US has a value added tax, which if the country's not thoughtful about that can actually impose a cost on businesses if they are donating instead of throwing food away. So date labels tax, liability protection, or immunity for businesses that donate safe food, food safety for donations. So in the food safety laws, do they make clear what you can donate? Food waste deterrence policies, which means this growing sort of set of policies that either penalize excess waste because it's a cost to the environment, a cost to society, or that require some food be donated. But in some countries where either their tax benefit is not that big or they don't have one, we've seen other examples of incentives such as like recognition or other accelerated permitting or other things like that for businesses that can show that they're engaged in regular donation or where the government's also providing funding to build the infrastructure.
So you've been doing this work for more than a decade now. What trends are you seeing in the last 10 years?
What we've seen has actually been tremendous amount of policy changes in just these, let's say the 25 countries over that time period. So there's been policies enacted in basically every single one of the policy areas we've looked at. And then the two that have really jumped out as ones where there's been a lot of progress were liability protections and these food waste deterrence policies, which is really the term that we've used to cover a set of policies that are, waste penalties or donation requirements. So if we look at these liability protection policies over the 10 years from 2013 to 2023, there were 3 of the countries that we worked in that had a policy in place in 2013. And in 2023, there were 9 countries with them. And then actually since that point, the US has updated its liability protection policy. So that's a lot of change if you think of the number of countries in this 25 country set um, enacting these policies. And I think that part of why we see that is that they're low cost. So especially if you think of this time period, COVID has been in the middle of here, like countries didn't have a lot of extra money to spend, but they thought about what's a way that we can really create this foundation for businesses and for food banks and nonprofits to show that we're supportive of safe, edible food getting to people rather than getting thrown out. Um, and then the other area that I mentioned, food waste deterrence policies. In 2013, of the 25 countries, only one had a policy. And now there are, at the end of 2023, there were 6 countries with those. And there's actually been even a few since then. And the idea behind them is that they're all very much tied to the local context, like what makes the most sense, with the idea that they're really driving food to be not needlessly thrown away and finding ways to say that that food has to get to people or to some other location that's not a landfill.
You mentioned how lengthy the process for policy change can be, but part of the point of the atlas is to allow governments to make decisions a little bit more quickly, right?
That's totally right. That the idea is how do we help every country not have to start from square one when they're thinking about a new policy, and how do we make it go more quickly because they know where to start?
We both mentioned food banks already in the conversation. Why are food banks the right partners for this work, and what do they bring to the Atlas Project?
They've been great. I mean, I feel like the great thing about working with food banks that we've seen, and that I think also is was somewhat surprising, is I think, being coming from the US context, most people in the US, we have this picture in our mind of a food bank that's like more organized, bigger, kind of part of this national network. And I should say, not every food bank in the US is part of that. And there are a lot of amazing, like, local food rescue groups as well. But what has been interesting working with the Global Food Banking Network members is just how different they are. And that, they all kind of formed to really respond to the local context. So in some of them, there's some that we've worked with that do very little shelf-stable products and mostly prepared foods. Like in India, for example, a lot of the GFN affiliates there do like real-time collection of food after like large events or college campus, lunch service. They're picking up the lentils and the rice and whatever. And some are much more involved in sort of, post-harvest and ag recovery. So I think because of that, they're innately really knowledgeable about the context and have been an amazing starting point for us.
Yeah, right. Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting. You alluded to this earlier, but I was wondering, what are some of the more recent policy advances that you're excited to see?
So we have in our new as of this spring policy advance series, we highlighted policy changes in 4 countries. And this is going to now be an ongoing thing. And actually, we worked with GFN to, we knew about some of them, but also to survey the food banks in the countries where we work to see if there were policy updates. So we'll now be rolling these out regularly. The ones that we highlighted this year, one was Singapore, which I briefly mentioned, passed a Good Samaritan bill that provides liability protection for food donors. And it not only is great because it provides that comfort to donors that, if they follow the food safety rules with what they're donating, they're not going to be held responsible. It also is the first law that really like mentioned food donation and kind of clarified its legality and worthiness. We had a tax update in Colombia, which strengthens the tax incentives and increases the value of the amount of tax incentives for food donation, and also included coverage for the transportation costs and not just the value of food, which is something we've been recommending in a lot of countries because we've heard a lot. I mean, the cost of transportation is pretty hefty and often can really make the difference as to whether food can be transported somewhere else rather than just going to the dump. We highlighted a law in Israel that's a new food waste deterrence policy requiring all government and public institutions to donate any surplus food to the food banks there. And then in the US, we highlighted an update to the liability protection, which I also mentioned a little bit, but just expanded an already very strong liability protection for food donations.
So, Emily, what's next for the Atlas for FLPC in your work?
This fall, which I think by the time this episode's out, this will probably also be out, is a Atlas starter toolkit, or like Start Here, we're calling it. So it's sort of a toolkit that goes over all the key policies we've tracked across countries with a 3 to 4 page primer on that issue, couple key things people should know about. So it's sort of for an advocate or a food bank or a business or government that what are you talking about liability protection? What are you talking about food safety? This is
Right.
really a starting place for them to understand those so they can then decide, where do I even want to go one level deeper? So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I'm really excited about all of that too. I have one more question for you. Emily, what is one thing you want to see in the near future that could drive change in our food systems?
Level one would just be more awareness on the part of governments as to how much fixing these issues of food waste and um, inadequate food recovery can solve all these other problems that they are trying to solve. Like it can solve, it can help with emissions and climate change. It can help with, I think about even Massachusetts, where I am, that regulated food waste in landfills because it was running out of landfill space, which is an issue in a lot of places. It can help build economic opportunity and jobs in food banks and food recovery and other things we haven't talked about, like upcycling and kind of creative uses of food, and then downstream things like composting and that kind of thing. And then also it's so important for people. Like I actually just was finishing up an article that looked at the like legal definition of the right to food and why the right to food implies that excess food waste is a violation of that right. Like you can't have the two things kind of coexist. So I think I know that's small, but I think at the first level, before even getting to what is a policy change, I think just being able to bring that awareness that this is a real opportunity to solve all of these other problems, and then really thinking about within your unique country and context, what's the next step that you can take. So, liability protection I mentioned is a great starting one because it doesn't cost anything and it helps really like build the foundation to say, this is a good practice. We like it. We want to encourage it. And we as the government are supportive of this happening. Um, but I think there's a lot more countries can do once they start there.
That's a great answer. Emily Broadley, thank you very much for being here with us today. It was very informative, and it's always really good to talk to you.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure. And we just love keeping on this amazing work with GFN.
Today, we're speaking with Brianna Casey, who served as the CEO of Food Bank Australia for 9 years. And we're excited to speak with her as she wraps up almost a decade of strengthening a network of food banks across Australia. Brianna, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, I don't know, perhaps you're in an introspective mood these days as you're wrapping up your marvelous career with Food Bank Australia. But what initially drew you to food banking?
I am a person who is incredibly passionate about social justice and social equity, and I'm an environmental scientist by trade, so I have a very strong interest in sustainability. My grandparents were on the land, they're farmers, so for me, farming and agriculture was something that I grew up not only understanding, but really respecting and being grateful for. So the opportunity to join Food Bank Australia was about an opportunity to work directly with farmers around their sustainable land management practices and how we can ensure that when food is grown and grown so well, we don't waste it. So for me, this was all of my worlds coming together at once and being able to amplify and share a voice for those who often don't have one.
Food Bank Australia has been producing the Food Bank Hunger Report for 13 years, which provides a comprehensive look at food insecurity in Australia every year. Why is this report necessary?
It is our most important piece of research at Foodbank, unquestionably. The Foodbank Hunger Report shines a spotlight on food insecurity. It tells us where hunger lives in our communities. It tells us why it's happening. It gives us some insights into the key demographics. It shows us the changing faces of hunger in Australia. And we now have longitudinal data so that we can observe trends and patterns and really understand what is contributing to some of the most challenging scenarios in our country. I absolutely, and a massive thanks to Food Banks Canada. We actually borrowed the idea of this report from them more than a decade ago. We've made it our own, but I would certainly encourage food banks all over the world to have similar resources, because while some countries do a great job of measuring food insecurity, here in Australia, our government does not. This is the single source of truth on food insecurity in Australia, and it is so rewarding to know that policymakers and media and the community and parliamentarians quote from and trust and value and learn from this resource. And in Australia, a couple of weeks ago, we saw a discussion paper released ahead of the development of Australia's first ever national food security strategy. This is something we've been advocating for close to a decade. Anyone who has worked in policy and advocacy knows that it is a marathon, not a sprint, to get policy and legislative change. But the thing that is really exciting about this new national food security strategy in Australia is it uses the UNFAO definition of food insecurity. So we're not just talking about whether Australia can grow enough food and whether we can export and what this means around trade and tariffs. It truly looks at access and equity. So there will be a National Food Council underpinning it. But that quotes from and draws on the Foodbank Hunger Report. It acknowledges the fact that whilst Australia produces enough food to feed itself 3 times over, we have so many people going hungry. How can we look at what's going wrong here? Is it supply chain? Is it around access to healthy food? Is it not being able to rescue enough food from farm gate? What is it that we can do differently? So again, a report that may at first glance look quite straightforward is now underpinning really important policies and legislation in Australia. The 2024 report that came out in October last year found that 3.4 million Australian households were experiencing food insecurity. And I think what really shocked people this year, people who'd had an assumption that food insecurity is about homeless people living on the street, and it is, but it's also about people living in our very own streets. And when we acknowledge the fact that 1 in 5 median income households is food insecure, suddenly people recognised we weren't going to other the issue. We're not othering. This is our issue. This is my school community, my sporting community, my church community, my social community. It made people start looking beneath the surface a little bit more. And we looked at what sort of behaviours were happening when people found themselves experiencing food insecurity. And we are fascinated by learning from and responding to the fact that the first 3 things that drop off the shopping list when times are tough are protein, fresh fruit and vegetables, and dairy products. So we are deliberately targeting those 3 categories with all of our food and grocery partners to make sure we can get those products into the households of those who really need it.
Zooming out a little bit and looking at the history of this report, how would you say that the Food Bank Hunger Report has helped advance Food Bank's mission?
First and foremost, it has helped us grow the profile of food insecurity in Australia. If we don't know that a problem exists, and if we're not talking about a problem, we can't solve it. It has given us some really tangible numbers and statistics that we can measure every year, and we can then look at trends around them. So we can talk to government about whether or not other policy settings, austerity measures, whatever the case may be, are having a tangible impact on rates of food insecurity. And for example, during COVID-19, when the Australian government lifted some of our social supports, we saw an immediate reduction in poverty and inequality. We saw an immediate reduction in rates of food insecurity. To be able to put tangible numbers to that and demonstrate to government that when they use their policy levers for good, we see corresponding outcomes at the household and family level. That's powerful and compelling. So for us, we want to be evidence-based and data-driven in everything that we do. And we use the Food Bank Hunger Report to really deep dive the problem. And then we have complementary research around social return on investment to really help demonstrate the impact of the activity of food banking. So it's about identifying the problem, ensuring the community understands it, ensuring that our food and fund partners understand what the problem is, and most importantly, the impact that we can have through partnerships and really strong and meaningful partnerships in turning that situation around and showing the change.
So you mentioned social return on investment. What did that report find?
We focused heavily on understanding the social return on investment associated with food relief and food banking activities across Australia. We looked at it through two perspectives. We wanted to really understand the impact of everyday food relief and the impact that it makes on not only households receiving food relief, but also in terms of the environmental impacts, the CO2 emissions saved, the water saved, the input costs, and so on. And it gave us a metric that $1, so every dollar that we're investing into our programs and into food relief is delivering $5.68 in terms of social return on investment. But we can also measure that per kilo. So we can talk about for every kilo or every kilogram of food relief provided, it delivers a $43 social return on investment around the social, economic, and environmental outcomes. So it really helps us understand the impact of food banking, but it also helps us with our impact reporting back to our donors so that they can have absolute confidence that when they are investing food or funds, it has a tangible and measurable outcome. And what we do know with so many companies who are now deeply committed to ESG and corporate social responsibility reporting, it means that we can assist them and how we can put numbers and metrics against the impact of their generosity and kindness.
Speaking of reports and research, the Global Food Banking Network and Food Bank Australia partnered in 2022 through the Global Food Donation Policy Atlas to release a food donation policy research paper and recommendations for Australia. So how have these pre-existing policies or the report recommendations impacted food bank and just food security and food waste in Australia in general?
The policy atlas for us was a real turning point because it helped us understand the context of Australian policies, regulations, legislation, not only through a lens we hadn't looked at before, but also through that global lens of how it compares to other jurisdictions. It helped us really think about what we could be doing differently to advocate to government around changes that we needed to see. And one of the areas of opportunity that this policy atlas and the research paper identified was the fact that here in Australia, the tax treatment of donating food or transport and logistics to food banking is no different than the tax treatment of dumping the product, which means if you are a hardworking farmer or primary producer, a food and grocery manufacturer, a family-run transport business, wanting to do the right thing by donating product or service to food bank, there was actually a cost. It's more efficient and more less burdensome on your budget to dump a product than it is to actually donate it to food bank at the moment. And what we wanted to identify was whether or not there were policies or concepts in other countries that would incentivize behavior to make it easier, but also put a financial benefit to donating products and services. So we put forward a concept, the National Food Donation Tax Incentive. What a catchy title. I know tax reform is difficult. It can be really challenging in terms of getting traction. But for us, we were able to use the policy atlas and the evidence therein to help build a case to work with End Food Waste Australia and KPMG to build that evidence case to really take to government the importance of us being able to use our tax system better to unlock more food. And through the work that we did, we identified that a tax incentive around food donation and supporting our logistics would unlock an additional 100 million meals a year, which would have been transformational for us here in Australia, not only in terms of feeding people who need access to fresh fruit and vegetables, and that's where the biggest gains are because we know in Australia, on average, 40% of products never leave the farm gate. So if we can access those great products and use the tax system to incentivize it, we're delivering great outcomes for people, but we're also delivering great outcomes for planet, because we know that that will be one of the most meaningful and fastest ways for Australia to really make a step change in terms of our commitment to halving per capita food waste. We got as far as having a bill tabled in the Senate last year, and unfortunately we had a federal election come along before that bill was debated and passed. So it is a live and current issue here in Australia, but my hope is that we are able to demonstrate and use that evidence base to really create some behavioural change in Australia, because I know our farmers work way too hard to have their products ploughed back in or dumped. They want it to end up in people's tummies, and we need to do better at connecting the two.
Yeah, best of luck moving that forward. That's very important work, to be sure. Are there other policies that you're advocating for as well?
Separate to the terrific work that we've been doing around the National Food Donation Tax Incentive, thanks to the great work underpinning through the Policy Atlas, we've been really focused on how we can lift the policy settings and really achieve systems change when it comes to food insecurity in Australia. At the end of the day, our objective is that food bank is not necessary. We don't want to have to exist here in Australia. So we really want to understand what is causing food insecurity in Australia. And when it comes to those living on or near the poverty line, we want to make sure that we have a lift in job seeker and related payments here in Australia. So the social supports that are wrapped around it. We want to make sure that we are able to get food relief to where it's needed the most. So we need to really unlock transport and logistics infrastructure solutions that are meaningful so that we can get to the most remote parts of Australia. We want to understand why remote First Nations communities have such high rates of food insecurity and what we can do to make a difference. So for us, it's not just about understanding food loss and waste, understanding CO2 emissions, understanding methane, understanding what's sitting behind a lot of these changes, but it's really about understanding what a meaningful partnership and engagement looks like with communities and how to achieve systems change so that ultimately here in Australia, we have an Australia without hunger.
My last question for you is, what is one specific change you want to see in the near future to move our food systems forward?
An acknowledgement that we do in fact have a hunger problem right across the globe, and that there are really straightforward solutions we could be implementing if only there was the political bravery and will to do it. It's definitely about ensuring that policy and advocacy is just as important in our food banking activities as the physical act of passing on food. Because if we don't get to the bottom of access and equity, we're never going to solve the problem of hunger across the globe.
Brianna Casey, thank you so much for being with us here today. And thank you so much for all of the incredible work that you've done over the last 9 years with Food Bank Australia.
It's been an absolute joy.
Today we're here with Tanaporn Oisaran Nukulun, who goes by Phi, who is the Director of Operations and Communications at Scholars of Sustenance, Thailand. How are you, Faye?
Very, very well. Thank you. Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, thank you for being here. You've worked at SOS Thailand since it was founded in 2016. And since then, you've done just about every job there is to do at SOS Thailand. What initially drew you to the work into food banking?
Well, the only one thing I never done is to drive a rescue truck. So
I see.
almost everything except driving. So actually my background is in food technology. So before SOS, I worked in food businesses like sales and selling foodstuffs and QA, QC, stuff like that. In around 2014, I began learning about international work of a nonprofits and even volunteer as a teacher back then. So I thought that experience told me how meaningful it is to be, I think, contributing directly to society, and it's kind of sparked my interest in building a career in a nonprofit sector. I applied and then I joined the team in 2016 and have been growing with SOS ever since.
That's fantastic. So I wanted to talk about the way that SOS works a little bit. In the United
Mhm.
States, we usually think of food banks as a place with a large warehouse that takes in and
Okay.
distributes really large quantities of food. But one of the things that's really great about the food banking model is it's flexible and it's community based.
Mm.
So what's unique about SOS Thailand's model?
Mm. What make SOS Thailand unique is the way we combine, food safety, community engagement, and the culture strength, all together. Like, I mean, all the surplus food that we rescue during the day is redistributed in the same day using a strong logistic cold chain system. And the critical, with the critical in Thailand hot climate, it is crucial for us to, work um toward the time. Like we rescue quickly, we redistribute it in the same days very quickly, and we also see the community as not just our recipients, but they are our partner as well. Like what in Thai culture is it has deep traditional of volunteering ourselves. So we involve the community volunteer during the distribution. I mean, these also create trust between SOS and our community. It is provide um, vulnerable local insight. Is allow us to expand more, you know, in across the country with our volunteer network as well, because we put their need first. Um, and also the first priority of SOS Thailand is the food safety. It's the key element of is all of the process that we do.
So SOS Thailand is doing such great work in food recovery and redistribution, but you're also doing work that goes beyond that. You're working with policy researchers and government to improve food policy and the food policy environment. So it would be great if you could tell us about this work. I believe it's with the National Science and Technology Development Agency in Thailand.
Correct. Yeah, yeah. So we'll just refer them by the NSTDA. So SOS Thailand has been working closely with the NSTDA, which has a mandate to drive Thailand toward a zero waste future. So they're organized during the COVID. Actually, they recognize our food rescue program as one of the most effective way to reduce food waste nationally. So together with an STD, the NSTDA, we have developed the major projects. One is the National Food Donation Food Safety Guideline, which were just released 2 months ago. The second thing that comes with um, the the food safety guideline is the rapid food safety test kit that the biotech team has developed for our recipient community and SOS. So it's a chemical that they can drop on the food that are suspected to be bad. The result will show within 10 minutes. So these two kit, these taste kit will be used in our own community with the local volunteer network, and for SOS also to, know the basic if food gets spoiled. The third thing is to explore carbon credit and tax benefit mechanism that link to food donation.
That's all very exciting and a good testament to the great work that you're doing that NSTDA approached you. I'd like to talk a little bit more about the National Food Donation Safety Guidelines. Those just came out recently, correct?
Yeah.
What do those safety guidelines help you do that you couldn't do before, and what kind of doors are they opening for SOS Thailand?
So as we were talking about, food safety is the main or key element of SOS work on food rescue program. I think it's open the door in terms of gaining trust from our food donor, the current existing food donor, and also those who has never been working with SOS before. Having these guidelines is not only gaining trust, but it shows that the SOS Thailand is supported by government agencies that help us develop this guideline. And these guideline is not it's important because it is SOS. It's the process. Decoded our process, and then they wrote this guideline based on the work that SOS Thailand has been doing. So, for example, if a hotels would like to donate surplus food from the buffet line, they read the guideline and see, oh, this is the best practices that they need to do. This is how they would prepare surplus food after the buffets end. And if they would like to donate to local organization that is not SOS, maybe they work with a local network, a community that going to their hotel. This is the way that um, these volunteer network will receive their products, their food donation, and then this is how they will redistribute it within their own community. And it's not it the guideline is supported by the government agency, not only the NSTDA, it's the Pollution Control Department, part of it. The Health Authority of Thailand is part of it. The FDA of Thailand is part of it. So it's several government agency that came together to develop this guideline to help Thailand going toward reducing food waste, which is bad for our environment.
Yeah. Thank you. That's great. Congratulations on that great work.
Thank you.
I have one more question for you. What is one specific change you want to see in the near future for our food systems?
Well, it's I think in our food bank world, food recovery and food bank, we would like to see no food waste. But in reality, it would be very difficult because the demand and the supply, we understand all of this. I don't need to get digging deep to that. What we hope to see is that every organization, these small little nodes in the community can also do food rescue so that food doesn't travel, create carbon footprint, and eventually donating food should be something that all country would normalize it. That's what we hope to see, besides seeing no food waste.
Phi, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, Jason. Thank you, SGFN, for having SOS Thailand.
Thanks so much for tuning into another episode of Food for Change, serving solutions for people and planet from the Global FoodBanking Network, and a huge thanks to our guests, Emily, Phi, and Brianna. We also want to say thank you to our sponsors and longtime GFN partners, Kellanova and HEB, for making this show possible. Before you go, take a minute to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts, and head to foodbanking.org/foodforchange to see full video episodes and for more ways you can get involved. Join us next week for another serving of inspiration and action, where we'll dig into why partnering with food banks isn't just good for transforming our food systems, it's also good for business. See you then.